I design video games. I support and train people in that. And one of the things I ran into over the years was realizing how much what I'm working with them on isn't programming, isn't actually even game design questions, isn't stuff you would assume like 3D modeling. Or I can and I do help them with it, but often it's just they've never finished like a 5-month project, and that's where they're getting stuck in the mud. They've put in a bunch of work. They've spent years trying to do stuff. It's not really adding up to stuff, and so that's where I eventually started figuring out the solutions for that aren't related to game development. It's just general long-term planning. It's being a producer. It's dealing with that kind of stuff. And often what I'm helping people with, and I think it's why it can still be applicable in comics kind of context or graphic novel context, is where it's not the same as just getting better at the main skill area. It's not that like if I was only a better artist, I could make a longer comic. If I was just a better writer, I could write a whole novel. It's a different way of organizing our time that if we were on a team, and this is where it's easier from games as sort of a metaphor, where it's literally in many cases a team, a producer is a whole different job, right, than a programmer, a designer, an artist, whatever. And so if you're trying to solo something and you don't have someone else who is, and perhaps sometimes a teacher providing structure, and this is where for a lot of people, they wind up with not needing to develop the skill area because their boss is doing it for them, their teacher, the professor is doing it for them. And it is also one of these things, though, that in life is the kind of gear shift that happens between undergraduate and grad school is increasingly, instead of like, okay, well, here's a homework assignment, I do these 10 problems by the end of the week. It's like, okay, well, you have to write a research paper. You have all year to do it. See you in July. If you have questions, I'm around. And like that destroys some people, but it's a different set of skills. It's the same thing in any line of work. If you're not going the academic route in life of between entry level, where they're telling you do this by 5 p.m. versus this much higher level, nebulous, kind of scary problem of I have certain objectives to achieve this year and a dangerous amount of freedom in trying to do that. And so I guess what's going to help me, though, is get a little more context about people in the group, if you're open to chatting, if you're comfortable with that, as to helping me understand a little bit about some of your backgrounds or context that you're coming from. Since again, I'm used to, if I just ramble, I'll kind of assume you're in the same boat as people I work with who do game programming, game development. I know that may not be the case here. Some ideas about lines of work you do, types of long-term projects you've done, even if whether or not comics or not, if anybody is comfortable sharing some of that, it'll help me have some context. Yeah, absolutely. And I was a computer science undergrad, as well as did business minor and that kind of stuff. But it's I think one of the reasons why it affects so many computing people and so many artists who I knew, and thankfully because I was doing games, even in undergrad, I was working with people in the art school and art department and so on. And I see Jane has done some complete comics as a total ADHD speed run, help learn how to complete a project, regardless of rendering skill. One of the dangers, right, in either of these fields is how deep of a rabbit hole any given thing. We could spend the rest of our life like drawing a really good jacket on somebody or programming an increasingly optimized routine that's kind of like all lost in the weeds and doesn't kind of fit into the big picture proportionally. And so this is where a lot of the project planning stuff really comes into accepting that sometimes the right answer for doing something in this context of I need a version of this that exists in a month, or I need a version that exists in 5 months or 2 years or whatever, is different from the kind of like philosophical ideal of the best it could be done. And often what we had in people from the art school joining us over in our club of people making games in undergrad or something, is that they could make a better 3D model. They could draw a better icon, but what they can't do is make 50 of those or 300 of those in the time we need it in the 4 months ahead of us to complete this whole thing. And so we wind up making these kind of trade-offs. And obviously is a thing that part of what I like about comics is the flexibility in drawing styles. We obviously see a wide variety out there. You can tell there's people who made their living in comics where that artist could probably render a better picture. They have accepted, here's the version I can do daily, or here's the version I can knock out every single weekend, or do an elaborate long-term thing, unless they're part of an enormous giant team who are really hyper specializing in very fine illustrations. It's making these trade-offs of, okay, well, I don't want to get in the way of my story, but also to strategically have finite time. And where this also starts to affect us in the process is, again, I talk about proportionality, where, you're in, say, high school, the teacher is helping you figure out, okay, well, you need to turn your rough draft in by this date, and then I'm going to grade it, and you're going to get it back. You're going to write me a second draft. You're going to hand it back to me, and then I'm going to give you feedback on it. You're going to write a final, and they're structuring this for you. When the world isn't doing that for you, it's up to you as to, like, you can really either shoot yourself in the foot or blow up the whole project by giving yourself too little, not enough, or no time towards, so you're going to have, a month for this final project? And when they're starting that, do they have to like tell you what they're doing or show you the style, or are they just like month go? Excellent. Yeah. So because both of those, right, are examples of things where you probably don't want to change your mind on either of those in the last week. But you also don't necessarily want to rush to the very first thing that you could do. And so it winds up being, okay, well, let's say proportionality wise, the first 25%, 10%, the first 2 days, whatever you choose, whatever feels right to you. Let's say that's when you want to kind of feature lock. Okay, I'm not going to be changing my art, my style, my main arc, what I'm trying to tell with it. And I'm going to make the best of this decision I've done so I can kind of pivot on that. And we start kind of subdivide into that some tasks of how do we evaluate that. And I tend to be the kind of person who I think by building. I'm a rapid prototyper by trade. Before I was doing the kind of things I do now, my work at big companies, I worked at EA for a little while. My work on game teams was we'd be like, okay, well, people have ideas. Let's get them working on machine as fast as possible to try them. And then we can figure out what's worth doing better and correctly. But our main design process was try a few different things and look at them and have them in front of you and be like, okay, well, this is a good fit for the way we can do things here. This feels like it's got legs. And even that, right, can be kind of a version of before you're filling out the whole thing. I think when I hired, it's an old indie game called Braid, the animator from that, David Hellman, I paid him to do our animation for another indie game called Alice in Bomberland. He must have spent 3 weeks drawing different versions of Alice to like different outfits, different style, different proportionality, whatever, to try to iterate and find, okay, what's the right version before we animate 128 frames of her jumping, falling, twisting, flipping, getting icons, whatever. So we could like nail down, this is the version we want before we go wide on now it's everywhere and now it's kind of irreversible. And so this is an important part of the proportionality is figuring out, okay, well, what's my time? What's my time or what's my tasks towards that near-term goal? And I think a lot of people start to overwhelm or worry themselves about, it's going to seem like too much. It's going to seem like too many instructions, too much work, too much pressure on myself. But the thing to keep in mind for all of this, whether we're talking about schedule building, we're talking about proportionality, phases, it's the opposite. It's actually about all the permission to things you're giving yourself to not worry about. It's that when you have a decent proportionality plan phase built out, you can say that, okay, well, the right thing to be spending my energy and mental energy on right now is what is my style or what's my overall story or what's my high level I'm trying to accomplish that I'm going to be able to commit to, not getting lost in the weeds of a bunch of other ways you could be spending your time or your energy. And so it's something that helps us not worry about the other stuff. So we have a nice plan. We can focus on the next step. Although the other part of this planning stuff, and it's where, I mean, I've got a new video course and I've been able to curious, completeveryproject.com should redirect to it. Although my web host has been kind of fishy. So every now and then the redirect fails, but if anybody's curious to check that out. A lot of what I'm talking about today is kind of like bits and pieces of that trying to adapt to what y'all do. But one of the things that comes out of this is that it's not just that we write down a plan like instructions, now we follow it, because when we're making a plan, we're kind of predicting the future to an extent. We're saying, here's what I'm going to want, here's how it's going to go, and no one can predict the future. We don't have crystal balls, never goes quite like we plan. And so it becomes very, very important to make your plan in a way you can still, it's flexible, you can adapt it. I like to use Trello for this. It's the one main example I use. It's a free tier tool you can use in browser just to kind of drag cards around. Some people use Google Calendar if they want to really get deep on time blocking. That's a helpful exercise for some people to say, not only is it going to be this week, but this afternoon or this evening or this morning, I want to get 2 hours this one or that. Google Calendar is great for that. Google Docs is really sufficient. And even if you just want to have like a list of per this week, here's my main goals for week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. How is week 3 different from week 2? What's happening within that time frame? And the reason I like things like that is that they're so flexible and rearrangeable versus a whiteboard kind of gets hard to shuffle things around. A corkboard kind of gets hard to reward what I stuck to it. And I can then nicely do it on my phone if I'm in the grocery store and I have an idea and I'm like, oh, this would be a great thing. And once you have any kind of structure set up, whether it's a Google Doc, Google Calendar, Trello, etc., it's great because you're all the time going to be having these ideas for this is a useful thought, this is a valid consideration, but now is not the moment for it. There's a different thing. I'm supposed to be thinking about the art style this week, or I'm supposed to be thinking about the story I'm telling, or near the end, perhaps some version of testing, feedback, iteration. We'll talk about that in a second. And so it tells me there's a thing to do, but that's actually next week me's problem, or that's week 3's problem. And it gives us a place to squirrel it away. We're not have to worry about, I'm not going to lose it. I'm not going to forget it. I also don't have to think about it. I don't have to keep juggling it in my head, distracting myself, taking my focus off of, there is one correct thing to be focusing on in this phase or in the current task. And it frees us up from that. And I mentioned, it was also his Jane comment about ADHD. A whole bunch of people who I meet in game development, whether they're programmers, artists, producers, designers, a whole lot of us are neurodivergent in one version or another. And so you wind up in lots of people who have various kind of ways of trying to accommodate around ourselves. And I think my audio will conclude at the end. Partly it's a little thing about taking my task I'm doing and putting it on a whiteboard in front of my face because it helps keep me on task about otherwise that is kind of my attention wants to go elsewhere. And again, part of what this is so good about is just making sure you've thought about in advance. You kind of put on a producer hat. You're temporarily, I'm now the boss or the manager. I've come up with a plan. And it's equally important than when you're focusing on as I'm doing an art task, I'm doing a writing task, I'm doing some other lens on what I'm doing, to take that producer hat off and put some trust in. I have a reasonably competent manager. It's a pretty cool person who I know, and trying to fit within the confines a little bit of, okay, well, whoever made this plan, I trusted what they had in mind. I'm going to try to fit this within the time frame. And what this is so great about for like a 1 month project is a great size for it. Some people feel like, well, I'll worry about this when projects get bigger. I'll worry about this when I get to a 6 month project, to a year or 2 year project. And the problem is if you can't plan 4 weeks correctly, you're not going to plan 4 months correctly. You're not going to plan 4 years correctly, right? It's literally going to take the same problem and multiply it times 4 or times 50. And this is the same deal where no matter how little time or money or human resources you have on something, everybody wants more. And it's the thing where we have small projects, game jams all the time. They have like weekend things, projects they're doing, hackathon type stuff. They're like, oh, if I just had an extra day, I could really do what I wanted with it. And there's teams that have, in the software world for games, a $400 million budget. They really wish they had a $500 million budget, right? They're doing like 7-year projects. They really wish they had an 8th year. That never goes away. And so we find a way to build the best thing that we can within the time we have it in that proportionality. I mentioned in there too, testing phase. And I'm kind of curious by all means, if what I'm suggesting here is like, well, that's not how it works in the comics realm. Correct me, put me down the rails. But like at least in the games space, a common use of a major chunk of the end of our time is some form of testing, some form of feedback, some form of showing, maybe not even a finalized version, but getting other people's eyes, input, feedback on it when it's not too late to change some stuff about they were confused about this, they were going to misunderstand this, it wasn't coming across with the tone I thought it was or something. And that's something that chews up much more time than we expect because a combination of, well, first I got to prepare, like say a Google form with some questions that narrow down what feedback would be useful for me at this stage. Because again, maybe too late to change my style, too late to change the overall story. But if there's something I know about how you're responding to a character or a story or a framing or something that's not too late to change. All right, well, let's give them those questions. And then it's out of my control, the timing. I need to give it to friends who are probably, I don't know, maybe give them a week to get back to me, to check it out, to fit in reading it, looking at it, playing it, whatever the case might be, fill out this form. So gather a few different responses, and a few is honestly enough for this kind of thing. And then I still need time to act on that feedback. So I need at least a week of time before there's not enough time to do anything with that feedback. And very quickly can chew up the last third of a schedule if you're not careful. But it can do so much to save pain on the wincing that comes after of every single person who sees this. They have the exact same kind of thing that snags them, that throws them off, that confuses them, they misunderstand. That if I had just gone through a little bit of testing, I would have noticed from the pattern clearly emerging before it's too late to fix. And it's a great thing that even if you don't wind up fitting it within your schedule for delivering in the context of this assignment, although again, I don't know if this is a part of like you encourage something like that, I find even those are very helpful for after a project is released in the class sense or in our groups. And my thing's called home team game dev. They release their game. Some of them will actually test after to figure out, even to assess, okay, well, are there lessons from this I could take to my next thing? Because sometimes that's still helps while my head's still in that space. Or it can be to reassess, okay, was there anything bad enough that it's worth me digging this thing back out of the ground and then sewing Frankenstein's limbs back together a little differently? Because it's only new once, but it's in your portfolio forever, right? It will forever after still be that thing the way you left it. And so it becomes worth figuring out like, okay, well, is there something that's concerning enough? I should go back and change something. Are they finding it problematic in a way of like, I can't believe I didn't realize someone might read it that way, etc. I'm glad I ran it by some other human beings who aren't me. And speaking of other human beings, this is where obviously between you have a actual instructor or teacher structure, teammates, and this is our classmates in this kind of case. Even if you're outside the context of a classroom, how helpful it is to have other people is a thing we can lose sight of, because just like we said earlier, sometimes a teacher or a boss might be breaking down structures for you. They might also be sort of inherently in those systems like this one, having built in, here's peers who kind of keep each other in pace, check in with each other, etc. If you're ever doing these things outside of a classroom, which is ultimately I'm often helping people who are kind of outside of the structures of school or their jobs or something, it's still incredibly, remarkably essential to find a community of peers, if nothing else, an accountability buddy, somebody who you can touch base with periodically. And so I don't know if y'all pair up, if you voluntarily want to, it could be maybe not even someone in this group, could be you've got someone you live with, a partner, a family member, a friend from school, a fresh set of eyes. One of the nice things about this kind of process is it could be something that in the programming world we call rubber ducking, where there are engineers who will have a rubber duck on their desk, not to try to get useful information out, because they'll describe their problem to the duck and in the process work out the problem. And a lot of people find that if they're talking about something to their friend who doesn't share the domain knowledge of art, comics, storytelling, business, game programming, whatever, just by having someone who cares enough about you that they're like, you know what, I'll humor you, talk to me about it. I may not have a lot to add, but I care about you succeeding at what you're doing. Let's talk about it once a week, whatever it might be. It can really help us untangle some weird knots just from, I formed it into a question. I expressed the thought. I said, you know what? I got it. And they're like, great. I'm glad I contributed. I'm glad I helped you out. And these are the sort of things that we start to worry about from the producer lens of when I was on the bigger company teams, the sort of person who would figure out, okay, we've had all day, we're doing a boom blocks, a Steven Spielberg Wii game. And we had arguments with the team of like, well, what can 8, 9, 10-year-olds figure out? And is this going to confuse them, whatever? And then we had a producer who came on the team and said, let's ask them, and brought in some 8, 9, and 10-year-olds to try the project. And sure enough, it gave us clarity on a rallying point for here's what's confusing them, here's what isn't confusing them. We have any kind of evidence to build on. But within our skill sets, it wasn't what I was trained to do as a programmer or as a designer. It wasn't my coworkers trained to do and as a musician. And so it just helped to realize that there's this other side different from do your skill better. It's a different set of skills to be able to switch between. I can talk indefinitely, but I first want to open up to if anybody's got I don't know, questions, thoughts, things about what you're doing that can kind of link into this that I can try to pivot towards, or what you got in mind. What kind of comics you're doing? Are they serious? Are they funny? Are they a mix of all the above? It looks like some people undecided. So, you know what? I want to share a decision-making process that I find helps a lot of my people who, again, for whether it's neurodivergence, whether it's fear overwhelm of creative, possible infinite canvases, helps them untangle some possibilities. Is it all right if I screen share for a sec and kind of we'll talk through picking a topic or approach or style? Yes, spreadsheet, everyone's favorite. Decision-making spreadsheet. And I swear this won't be too, accounting-ish, although they're good for that too. So the main thing I want to focus on is making a decision where it feels like I'm kind of overwhelmed by too many possibilities. And again, this is a very real thing that actual producers and industries do. This is, well, we don't talk corporate side stuff. It is a reason that why some projects get greenlit and others don't. And as long as you're putting your own lens on this, it can be a great way to still, okay, I've got a lot of different story ideas or art style ideas I could do, etc. Let's try, I don't know, even just at a high level, because I don't necessarily, they don't have a use case you're comfortable bringing up, like a few different ideas you're considering or undecided between. And obviously you're not committed to anything I'm doing here. There's just fodder for us to build from. Humor, right? Jokey, silly, it's an option. Realistic portrayals of something when it's a moment in our life or something. And the reason why I'm doing this, right, is that any given person, there's no right answer for this. There's a case that could be made for all of this, depending on what you want to do. Oh, something spooky. Thank you, Jane. Spooky. Okay, now the reason why we lay out our ideas in a spreadsheet is because now the second question we're going to ask is, on what criteria would I pick one over another? And there's probably multiple, which is expected, but this is part of the exercise. Why would I specifically, not like the world necessarily, but why would I, you in this case, and anyone's looking to shout out or type in an answer, I found the chat popped up. Why would you pick one of these over another between your A and your B? And there's an example I bring up in a lot of my books and things. It's called Buridan's donkey. Historically, it's Buridan's ass, but you don't use that word so much. But it's a philosopher problem of there's a donkey, there's different versions of it, two equally appetizing bales of hay. And like this one looks pretty decent, that one looks pretty decent, and it starves to death from indecision because it can't start eating one or the other because it can't come up with a good reason to pick one over the other, when honestly either would have been fine to start with. The correct choice is either, the wrong choice was neither. So often I'm trying to, like, if nothing else, well, yeah, random would be a good start, but there's still probably a reason why we might pick one over the other. For example, I don't know, do I have experience in it? And that's not the only reason why we'd want to do it. But if I have experience in one, it might give me an advantage in, like, there's some benefit to taking that because I feel a little more confident at it. Is there other, like, different criteria someone else might think about as to why? Let's see. Whether you can develop it allows you to complete the project within your means and time frame. All right. And I'll just say feels realistic for me at this time, right? Whatever that means, however we digest that. Let me just add some little wrapping here so we can, let's see. I keep misplacing format wrapping wrap. There we go. So we can kind of fit in one cell. Thank you. But yeah, that's totally a real one and an important one as to why, okay, this might be an awesome thing to do. I currently am not the person to pull this off in the time I'm trying to do it in. That's a valid criteria. Is there another reason why I might pick one of these and the other? And I'll just throw another one that again comes off for games people is like, do I think other people will like this? That may not be your top criteria, but you probably care a little bit if you think it's something people will respond well to. Because ultimately, right, a lot of art, creativity, we're communicating, we're putting something out there for other people in some sense, whether or not commercially or something. Choose something to know. Yeah, will it be fun? I love that. And this is a great thing where often in my groups, we're not explicitly like a vocational job training group where we make games because it's fun to make games. We have people who they make music. They don't care to get better at making music. They just like it. They like to jam. There's people who make art that aren't trying to get better at art. That's not the only reason to make art. Big Bob Ross fan. Paint because it's worth painting. And if it's going to be fun, it's also right a practical consideration of I'll feel more motivated to do it. I'm more likely to keep doing something I like doing. So that's a valid consideration, not the only consideration. That's why we have columns. And let's maybe add one more. Is there some other criteria somebody can add about why you might pick? Oh, yeah, no, that's great. Let's see the image I'm trying to build of myself. And I'll put in there like positioning, portfolio, branding, persona. Yeah, that's a great lens on it. And this is a big one too for I'm working with people and they're often trying to figure out, gosh, if I make a bunch of puzzle games, are people going to think I'm the puzzle game person? And is that who I want to be? Which is like, not objectively bad, but it's a choice, right? If I only make a bunch of action stuff, am I closing some doors? Am I losing some fans who are like, oh, that's the person who does that action stuff. Okay, so this is probably enough categories. And obviously, you can have as many categories you want. Part of what's so great about this to begin with is even having articulated, here's criteria I'm trying to decide on, here's what I'm trying to weigh, we're already got a head start on where we were because we can now like articulate, these are things that matter to me, and you're going to come up with a different set of columns than I will. That's part of how we can start to make these decisions separately. But where it's going to be more valuable is we're going to score these, and it's going to be most loosey-goosey, made up 1 to 5. What is a 3 versus a 4? It's a feeling thing, but it's better than nothing. And it's a version of kind of linear model decision making, which is a scary way of describing scientists do this stuff, hospitals do this stuff, investors do this stuff to balance. There's a bunch of complex considerations. There's usually based on actual research, actual data, actual things. We're just going to kind of wing it from the gut because one cool artifact of this is it helps us make a rational decision as we're going to see. So I'm going to make a score here. Score. And the reason I'm doing this in advance, sum of each one of these rows together. The reason I'm adding together is we want to make sure we're scoring these. So 5 is good. 5 is what I want. And 0 is bad. And so if I somehow worded one of these backwards, so the opposite number would make sense, I might rephrase it, but we got to make sure we're going to add these. So positive is good. High score is good. And I'm just going to make up answers, right? Because each person's going to be different. Experience added. Let's say I've never made this kind of comic before. Maybe comparably, I've done some little more martial arts theme. I've done some humor. Maybe I didn't love it, but I've done it. Realistic moment, day of life, never done it. And spooky, I've done a little. This is genuinely the amount of thought you might put into it because obviously your answers will be different, but you just kind of crank these out. It's not a sit there and contemplate and stress out. It's a relative thing. This one more than that one. They don't have to even be unique. They just happen to be in that case. Feels realistic. Okay, long. That one's going to feel tough for me on realism for the time frame I'm trying to work in a martial arts theme. I could pull it off. Humor, partly because I've done it before. I feel confident about it. Realistic moment in our life. I'll say I don't know how to tell that story. That sounds like a cool story worth telling. I don't feel like that is a lens I bring. Oh, speaking of which, another one I didn't have here, but I often have for my people I'm training. Will I learn from this? Right? Will this help me grow? Because that's kind of the opposite of have I done it before. Sometimes we do a thing because I've not done it before, and that's a great criteria to care about. I'm going to add a new area to my skill sets. And then spooky, realistic for me. Yeah, let's say, I don't know, for some reason it feels like I can pull that off. Do I think people will like this? I think they might love this, but, realism. Martial arts theme, sure, humor. I think they would if someone else did it. I don't think they're going to love the version I can do. And remember, we're not trying to answer the universe, we're trying to talk about ourselves and our own decision making here. Realistic moment in our life. Again, I think someone else could do it in a way people would care about. I don't think I can. And so like when I was scoring what kind of podcast I wanted to put out, I've been running a podcast since 2015. I went through a process kind of like this. There's a lot of podcasts there's like buddies hanging out, and it helps people not feel lonely because they sit there listening to people chatting and it just has a good vibe and energy to it. Those are great. I don't know how to do that. That's not my relationship to other people. I know how to like focus on a topic and talk about it like I'm doing here. And so I scored that low for me because I know people would like it, not the version of it I am able to do. Spooky, let's say, yeah, I'm maybe dangerously confident at that. Will it be fun? That sounds super fun. Martial arts theme, sounds cool. Humor, I might have fun doing it, even if I'm not that great at it. Realistic moment, not fun for me. And then spooky, I don't know, neutral. I didn't think about it. We'll go with the image I want to brand. Let's just kind of flip it around here a little bit just for sake of it. I'd really like to become this kind of person. Less that. These seem interesting, but there's not kind of who I'm trying to be in the world. And humor, same. And I'm just going to score this. I'm going to copy paste that. Of course, this is spreadsheetism, so it's carrying our rows down. So we have our scores for these columns. Our scores across, just added together these numbers. And now the very first thing we could do, right, is we could just identify, well, probably not the one that's got an 8. Maybe Spooky's got more in its favor than I thought it might. And maybe this one's not the right moment for this to be the next thing that I do, but it's got some sort of basis. The other nice thing about this, if you're with a team or you're on like a public committee or you're part of a school board or something, you put things in this kind of format, you can now disagree collectively as to like, well, hold on, why'd you put that number there? Or isn't there a column we're overlooking the importance that we should bring up to think about as a team about our budget, our strengths, those sort of things. And you can engage other people in this conversation more productively than, I don't know. It feels like there's a lot of different reasons to do a lot of different stuff. Now, the other thing we kind of snuck in here, I want to show a fix, but it gets a little more messy on the spreadsheet, but we can do it. Not all these factors are equally important. And in case it wasn't apparent, like if it's not realistic, then the rest is kind of gets smoked, right? Like then, okay, well, that would be great if I could do it. I don't think I'm a person do it. So we're gonna add one extra factor here, and that's a weight for how important each one of these is. And we can think of it as a percentage. And so let's see, realistic, I said that one's like super important. I'm going to say like 300% important. Experience, let's just baseline that at 1. Do I think people will like this? 0.5. Let's say I don't care. I'm not doing this for people. I'm doing this for me. I want to tell a story. That's what I'm in the mood to do. That's why I'm picking my projects, or I'm in a learning context anyway. Will it be fun? Let's say it's important to me, 1.5. And we'll go into trying to build. I'm going to say 1. Not because it's unimportant, because it's not my priority on this project. Maybe my later projects will learn more about that. Right now, I just got to get some reps in and got to make some stuff. All right, so we have some multipliers up here. And so there's a way to do this a little fancier with what's called a sum product. We're going to do it a little manual because I think it makes it easier to follow without having to memorize the commands. So I'm going to take literally just this number times, I'm using my arrow keys here, that number plus, and I think this makes visual what I'm doing, that plus that times each one of these. I'm weighting it so that one of these, I should finish typing it before I start talking about it so I don't mix these up. There we go. So with the weighted score, now this is an 18, in which this factor is times 3, this factor is 50%, this factor is times bonus 50%, and then these are neutral. And a little trick here, again, I don't want to get y'all too lost in spreadsheetisms, but if I just copied this down, it's going to be ruinous because it carried both of those rows. The little spreadsheet trick that's handy to know is a $sign. Okay, I want the 1 to stay the same. So I'm going to go put a $sign in front of each one of these ones. $sign, $sign, $sign. And because I did that when I copy paste it, it kept the 1 row in place. And so now we have our weighted scores. Each one of these is our weighted version. So now when I factor how important realistic is, humor is actually kind of pretty close to when it's winning the battle. Spooky is a close follow-up, and it tilts the score because yes, those other things are important, but when I'm realistic about my priorities right now, realistic seems super important because like I have to get a grade on this, I have to deliver this, or I have to meet my publisher ship date or something. And so that reality is a tough filter. The other thing you start to do, right, is you don't owe anything to this piece of spreadsheet you put together in a few minutes to think about something. If you change your mind, you're like, you know what? I know this one says 24, but gosh, I'm really feeling it. I had a friend in college. The way he made decisions was he would flip a coin. He's like, heads, I'm going to go to the party. Tails, I won't. And he would flip the coin, and it didn't matter how it landed. That wasn't the point. It was because in the process, he figured out how he wanted it to land, and then he just did what he wanted to do. But so if in the process of doing this, you're like, God, okay, I could go back and be like, oh, I don't know. What if I juiced this number? Would that crank this score higher? You don't need to make a case of the spreadsheet. Just go do the thing you want to do. Although, again, this can be a helpful thing occasionally in the context of a team. Okay, let's say we had 24 possibilities and it was impossible to even talk about them productively. We can use a process like this to score something. And perhaps, we've had a team, I think it was Raging Speakers for a bunch of years. There's a thing called Indicate. It's an arts festival for game developers. And we'd have like 85 speakers to organize. A bunch of people would submit stuff. We each separately would have our own column in a spreadsheet like this. And it'd be like Chris's scores, Dan's scores, Jess's scores, whatever. We do our sum on the side. We narrow down to the ones that overall had the highest top quarter of scores or top third of scores, discuss those. And we can have a productive conversation, be like, okay, well, Jess, we noticed you did 2 top 7 here. We didn't. What? You gave him a 1. Do you want to talk about your reasoning there? But it makes more transparent our thought process. And way, even for ourselves, we can start to introspect a little bit about, why don't I think that's realistic for me? Why isn't this going to fit? But it helps us pick a thing so we can move forward with confidence that I didn't just decide it on a whim. I didn't just pull a number out of a hat. I didn't just guess. I thought about, what are the things I'm weighing between? What's important to me about the decision that I'm making? How important are those relative to each other, which is its own, I think, helpful way to think about. Again, at this time, this seems important, not important right now. This seems important, not important right now. It has to be a priority because I'm on a deadline here. And it just helps us narrow down, okay, well, now at least I've got 3 to decide between, and I might then run those by a friend. The other thing I'll also do, again, like I said earlier, often I'll think by building. If I can prototype a bunch of stuff, even in a sketch form, maybe I start to storyboard these 3. Maybe I start to draw at least one panel of each to start to feel like, you know what, when I start doing it, I'm kind of rubbish at this one. I thought it kind of felt like it seemed interesting in my head. It's just not coming together the way I can do things. All right, well then scratch it off, narrow it down to 2, and etc. Of starting some things to figure out what to follow forward, so you don't wind up wondering about second guessing yourself. Oh, if only I had tried it, how much better would this have gone? You have a better sense of what you're not missing and a clear, rational case for why you didn't do one thing for another. This is part of what, if you're ever a producer on a team, you have to be often making a concrete case. This is where the testing is so valuable. It's where things like this process are valuable. Somebody comes back to you like, why are we doing this versus that? You don't just want to be like, Sam said so. You don't just want to be like, I thought it seemed cool. It's helpful to have any sort of case you can explain for, well, we considered this. We thought about these factors about it. When we looked at it, this is what made the most sense at the time. We moved forward from that and did the best we could with it. And now it's hard. It's harder to argue with, or if it is, you kind of get off in the weeds and you can have a specific constructive discussion rather than these 2 people feel differently about it. Now what? I'll stop the screen share though. Any questions, thoughts about the spreadsheety thing of, I often, because I've got people who they're doing games and they have a 12, 20, 30 ideas they want to work on. I'm like, we can build one at a time. And we'll go through something like this to try to narrow it down. Yeah. And again, part of what I like about this sort of thing, it's so general in life skill. Honestly, when I was picking where to live in apartments, that was how I narrowed down. It was like how worried I am about the cost, how I feel about the landlord, the location, the whatever. And me and my significant other at the time were able to figure out, like, between our different priorities, what are our weights? How important is to us this factor versus that factor? And it's giving me a helpful way to make this kind of otherwise very nebulous decision people kind of stumble into out of like, I don't know, a lot of it matters. There's a lot of things, and that's valid. But if you can articulate those things and how much they matter to you and even get on the same page about some stuff, it just helps us move forward with confidence. And this is where, again, when you're thinking about these processes, the phases, the stages, trying out some different things to even sketch before you then kind of commit and be like, all right, feature lock. Well, no going back at this point unless there's an emergency. I'm going to make the best action comic I can. I'm going to make the best humor thing I can or whatever. Well, okay, at that point, you want to feel like you use that time to inform the decision in a way you can feel good about going forward. You gave yourself some reason. I tried some different things. I got some testing feedback. I ran it by the instructor, something. And that's also been a validation thing in my life. If I get an advisor, a teacher, somebody who's more veteran than me in a field of something to look at, be like, this one seems really interesting. I'll be like, that's enough. Now I can spring forward on that one and feel like someone who sees something in this I don't. That's already a big bonus column of a thumb up. We might 5-weight it 500% in a column for how important an idea that could be. But this sort of thing can be at an early stage for what to do for a type of comic. This is also where, and let me try to figure out this. So when we're thinking about production and planning stuff, the other thing I'm often working on people in is actually a further lens zooming out. Because I'm often working with people who are very early in their game development path in life. They've probably done some tutorials online. They've made maybe a handful of small projects on their own, but they're starting to think about like a longer arc of their life. And this is great because, like, I'm so glad you brought the question up about, is this go with the image I'm trying to build of myself, positioning the brand and the persona, thinking about what projects will this set me up for? What kind of projects do I eventually want to get to? Because I might be the best in, my strength right now might be a bunch of humor, but if that's not what I want to spend my life doing, I need to get out of doing that as efficiently as I can and get myself into at least, maybe if I change my mind, I'll have tried on the shoe and been like, oh, well, it's not Action Comics either. That's just not my deal. But I tried it rather than, okay, well, I'll just do a few of these. I'll just do a few more of those. And before you know it, 10 years passed and you got this pile of humor comics and you're just like, what have I done? Who have I become? And you don't want to live that life. Like that's probably not why you're doing this. It's probably things you want to do and you want to tell you want to work towards. And so that's often too where we're thinking about these longer term projects. I think I did a keynote for the Game Jam recently, and we're talking about at the end of it, some of these people are trying to figure out, I want to do like a 3-year project, a 7-year project. Some people do that. And I'm like, man, you start doing the math for how many of those are going to fit into your life. How many stories do you want to tell? How many different things do you want to get your hands in? I get kind of, I don't know, I get kind of antsy. I like to do a bunch of little stuff. It's kind of my deal. But at the very least, in the same way we had the process here of phases and stages, you can think about it in the arc of your career, your lifespan, whatever. This is a helpful thing I did, and maybe not in this resolution or detail. When I was like in my 20s, out of schoolish, kind of figuring out like, okay, well, knowing the plan's probably going to change, like all these plans are going to change as you go. Okay, if I can kind of figure out a way to use my 20s to kind of try out some different things, to then feel out which I feel the best about, really kind of throw myself more into in my 30s, or if I can kind of like figure out how to do certain things by this decade or that decade. Again, even creatively, it can be a thing about, okay, well, I do want to, I aspire to make a huge, enormous, a series, a multi-year thing, whatever. Then in the same way we have phases and stages within a project itself, it can be, okay, well, what do I have to do to make sure I really feel like I'm buckling up into a roller coaster worth getting on? I've tried a few totally different divergent ideas, approaches, angles, styles, whatever, got some of that out of my system to look back on it with some hindsight and been, okay, well, out of these, a few different smaller ones I tried that were not multi-year long, buckled up, extended series, tried a few to be like, okay, out of those, that's the best one I did. Or people responded best to this other one. And a lot of my work, part of why I do that, keep talking about this thinking by building thing I've done, my early, I think it was 2007, I made an experimental gameplay project like every single night for 7 months on the internet. And I just went back and looked at the nice thing about anything you're doing. It's like web traffic metrics are there. It's very trackable about who's looking at what, who's clicking what, who's sharing what from where. And I could see some spikes on like 5 or 10 of those, not even huge traffic, nothing significant, but compared to the rest that were like non-existent, 5x or 10x non-existent, into like, well, there's more going on here than there. Then I went back to those and doubled down on them and made some iPhone games that did really well I tried a bunch of stuff and I was like, I have evidence that these are some things worth working on, and a bunch of other trash. But if I could have told ahead of time what was trash and what wasn't, I wouldn't have needed to try a bunch of experimental things. That was sort of a helpful approach to me. And I've also known different time frames. I have to do like 1 month games or 1 month creative projects, 1 month per song or album approach or story thing they want to try on, to help feel like they have an informed basis for some sort of outside validation. Other people responded, people shared it, people talked about it. When I talked to people about it, they didn't get confused. I was enthusiastic talking about it. Okay, well, that's where I want to spend more of my time. But it's a choice as to how much that's what you want to move towards. And this is just like any of these plans, expecting fully, it's going to change, right? It's not like we make a plan at the start, we write down the instructions, and the rest of it we now are chained to follow exactly what we wrote. We need some sort of rhythm. And the rhythm we've tended to find for our game development people, I would guess applies to a lot of our creative areas, but games has been the fields I've tended to apply it in, is basically weekly is an appropriate rhythm to kind of check on, do I need to adjust my plan? Do I need to rethink how much proportionality I'm spending to this thing, to that thing? And the way we kind of do those weekly check-ins, whether it's alone, or sometimes we'll do internal videos, we'll do it with buddies. I've got some people who in my field are kind of like peers of mine. I meet with once a month, and we just kind of touch base on past, present, future is how I think of it. It's an adaptation of the stand-up mode used in businesses, but it's basically what's happened in the time since, a week ago, or last time we touched base a month ago or whatever. What's the state of it right now? Just talking about like the current world you're living in. And then what are you doing next? And that can be referencing your plan and be like, okay, well, the plan was this, but I'm going to tweak a little bit off of that. I'm going to change this. That's going to move that ahead. I've got now clarity now on a thing I tried that I can cut this whole bit entirely that thought I was going to need more time on. So I'm going to make some adjustments to my plan. And like, that can be it. But and sometimes the plan is basically just being followed and you're like, this is going great. But gosh, the energy and time it can save on, I'm glad I reassessed because I've been doing this stuff. It's not getting the direction I thought it was. I'm not feeling this out of the other. And if I didn't have those little checkpoints with myself to be like, I need to figure this out sooner rather than later before it's too late to change or try something else. Does someone have a comment or thought? The order of these phases is also a thing where a common, I use that Burden's donkey example of indecision can just destroy us. If there's two things that both need to happen or plenty of different ideas, the other place that really messes up is we're trying to get too detailed about people who aren't used to doing the planning side of stuff. What order should this or that go in? And working with people on these schedules that are 6 months long, they're arranging dozens, sometimes hundreds of tasks of art and sound and programming and design and testing and all this kind of stuff, writing and all these pieces that come together. And if you're not careful, they'll get stuck on, well, should this be like earlier than that one? And should this be week 13 or 14 or 15? And on whatever granularity you can run into the same problem. And typically the reality is there's a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen, most of which the order doesn't really matter. It just doesn't. It's just a bunch of things that need to happen. Boards need to get nailed together at some point. And as long as they are in the appropriate phase, so they're not, during the style decision and they're going to get ripped up, or they're not during the testing and it's kind of too late to prepare certain things for testing. As long as they're in the right phase, arbitrary is kind of as good a starting point as any. And so it's often we're kind of working our schedules. The first thing we'll do is make a brainstorming list of all the things that are going to happen. I need to pick a style, I need to pick a story, I need to pick an overarching, name my character, you need to name the thing itself, you need to whatever. And even just randomly spreading those out. I think of it like putting cards on a table. So, you dump the puzzle pieces out, you just spread them out. So it's kind of distributed. That's a start. And already you've now got a more manageable, these could happen this week, those could happen that week. But after that, you can start to play this trading game of there are some things that are order dependent. And you can look at it and be like, okay, well, this would make sense earlier in my schedule than that. So let's switch them. And then this has a reason to be later in the schedule. So let's slide it over there. It's getting crowded. Let me spread that this way. And so even though most of it isn't order dependent, it just helps to kind of like list all the stuff you're going to have to do, come up with, solve, answer, learn how to do, et cetera, along the way, spill it out in whatever order. And let me also just show kind of example of this kind of stuff in the Trello. Y'all use Trello for anything? I don't know if people here use it for mood boards, scheduling, personal organization, grocery lists. All it's about is like we can make columns with names, if I can spell names. We can have cards, card 1, card 2, and we can have like another column. And then we can rearrange this stuff. And now arguably this is, I'm probably saying this wrong, Kanban, whatever people call it. This is the word that this is really based on. If you just Google things for that, there's a lot of services that aren't Trello that do it. I use Trello for it, but a whole bunch of other websites basically let you do cards you can rearrange in columns. We're just going to kind of walk through an example of doing a light schedule for that. And so let me kind of show some of the basic stuff we might do here of unsorted tasks. And then first we're going to brainstorm in no particular order stuff that we now in this thing existing. Let's try to do a comic, which is going to be, somebody will probably know better than I do. I'm going to try to guess at some stuff that goes into, you got to make a comic, maybe a common sense, decide the topic. That's going to happen, like surely. Pick my style. I need to do that. Clearly, sure, certainly. Genre, there we go. Yeah, pick the genre. Great. Some other thoughts of just things that have to happen at some point in a 4-week time. Write a script. Love it. What was it? Headline. Deadline. Sorry. Deadline. Yes. Okay, great. Yeah. Right on. Revisions. Sweet. Character designs. Prop design. Got it. Storyboard. Upload schedule. Test. Reader. Whatever version that takes in comics. It may not be quite as fungible as it is in. I mean, I assume there's still probably value in the process. When I do audiobooks and I do video courses, a big part of my routine is I test the heck out of it before I put it public, and it saves me pain answering questions of people I could have answered with some changes. Title art, cover art, is that a thing? Maybe, guess depends where you're putting it. Cover art, logo, question mark. Web domain register if you're doing like a web comic or promotion. Twitter handle, I don't know, not even calling that anymore. Online social post to promote it. I don't know, maybe. And this part was fun about it. You start thinking about, okay, what are things I might do, might not do. I was gonna start now picking some actual dates. I don't know, what's a day of, is there's Thursday like when this class is every week? Oh, excellent, that's nice and easy. All right, so June 27. And I'm gonna actually make a note here. It says by or for or do, but it means the things we're doing That's not what these things start. We're just trying to get them done by that date. And then I'm going to go through let's see, August 3rd by Aug 3, and then by Aug 10, by Aug 10. And then when does this thing actually due? Oh man, this is longer than I thought it was going to be. Good for you. Good for all of you. By September 7. Warning, not a Thursday, I write to remind myself on the schedule. This is part of what's nice about plans is they can still be very easily changed. I had a project where we did a bunch of planning about, and I think where it was before GPS was common on phones, we could do like university level GPS on bus systems. So we made a system for the visually disabled in the Pittsburgh community to use the public bus system there. And we came up with this whole scheme. And then right as we were walking out of the room from the blueprints, the kind of like the architecture phase of this project, we saw this big flaw that was going to make a bunch of work later. And I was like, we got to change this. Like, no, we already made the plan. And I was like, the point is because blueprints are easier to change than a building. Like this is when you change it, when it's easy to change. So yeah, let's do that. It was time, energy well spent. And this one, I'm still going to keep this one to 26 because it's like today. And I'm going to get rid of the note. And I'll just say like, done. All right. So a couple of things we're going to be considering. First of all, we're going to be like, make schedule. Although actually, little Trello trick, I double click under a column, I can create a new one. I'll make a done column. I'll drag it under it. Done. Let's see if we've done anything at all. Maybe not yet. So, okay, I'm going to do what I call take my shopping basket and drag my column kind of deeper into the schedule and just start scattering some cards. And if nothing else, okay, we got near the end. I'm specifically going to fill this one up and be like, buffer week for last minute stuff. I'm going to put kind of a blocker there. I don't want to plan that last. Actually, this is actually for release. But like, I don't want to plan anything for the time. I'm expecting stuff that's going to cascade. Some stuff I'm really realize need to get done is going to get popped up. I'm going to leave room for that. I know that near the end, we're going to have testing of some sort, test reader. And then I need time to implement any changes. Implements my programmer word. Make any changes based on test reader feedback or notes. And the other thing about these is like kind of this crumple zone for you're trying to not overlap other tasks into this. But if they do, it's like, well, you still had a little bit of crush space to fit it in before, you know, you fall off into the cliff. All kinds of mixed metaphors there. All right. So out of these, just any of these, can anybody spot what do we need sooner or later? I've got to figure out deadline immediately. So I'm going to put that basically there. Any other stuff you can like decide topic seems early, right? Any topics that necessarily this would obviously go earlier, later, probably cover it later. Or does someone like find that helpful as an exercise to do earlier? Right on. A big feeling, big mood. Maybe in like week 1, or is that like unrealistic to do all the way? Okay, great. Nice. Anything else we can spot? Anything like a good case for cover art late, logo late, probably web domain. Might save that. Might even say like after the class ends. It's gonna be kind of another bucket. And if I want to do that, let's see. Let's decide how we feel about it after. Which would be, you can't do that with a business product. You got to promote before it exists. But this is not a business product. So genre and script probably both pretty early. Can y'all help me figure out? All right, can two of those fit in the same week? Does one of these happen before the other? You may each have different answers. Okay. Is character designs and genre in the same week possible? Or is that like unreasonable? One of the things I also run into for a lot of stuff, and I get this worse from computer programmers than maybe I do from arts people, but maybe I'm wrong, is that most tasks are squishy. And the version I'm often using for this, right? I think I literally use it in one of my video courses or audiobooks or something, but like, if I give you 5 seconds to draw a house, you can draw, a square with a triangle on it. If I give you 5 minutes, you'll draw a better house. If I give you 5 hours, it's going to be a much better house. If I give you 5 years, you could spend 5 years to like try different kinds of houses, to like take an art class or 2 or 4 to get really good at it, to try to enter in competitions. You could have a much better picture of a house. But like almost any one of these tasks, you could pick and be like, well, I want the version that's going to take me 2 weeks, 1 week, an hour, 3 weeks. It's about proportionality within this. And ultimately, it's a choice of that's when I'm trying to be as done as I can be with that to move on from it. And these others that we got probably picking style pretty early-ish, before or after script. Same time. Part of character design. And actually, another thing we didn't really put in here, but I would also build in, again, like phases and stages about, say, for game development stuff. A common part of a lot of industrial design, I think architecture, certainly for game programming, et cetera, is part of it's a competitive analysis thing. And if you're totally new to doing it as a commercial practice, can feel a little bit morally corrupt. I don't believe that it is, when it's done correctly. But right, it's literally okay, well, if I'm doing an action comic, a kind of survey of what are some other action comics that people who like what I'm trying to speak to the audience of, what do they look like? How do they work? Finding those, studying those, taking notes on those, doing kind of a survey, not to copy off what they're doing, but to be aware of the context you're kind of existing in as a musician, as an artist, as a game programmer, etc., can be very helpful. Does anyone feel like that'd be helpful to include that sort of like competitive survey find reference? Appropriate. Any other out of these rest of any of these other matter? The actually, I'm going to make a note here. You see this in my video course too. If I say unsorted tasks, I did this in all capitals equals because otherwise I forget. I'm not looking at the column heads. I think I have an extra week in the schedule and start spreading cards around, and I wind up with like, oh no, I have a whole less week than I thought I did. This makes me less likely to notice I left my shopping cart in the middle of the aisle. Oh, I guess it looks like we're starting to get kind of in the middle here. Ooh, okay. So this is where I said earlier, often the order is not super maybe that important. I guess revision is probably after deciding the topic and storyboarding. Storyboarding before that, prop design, I don't know, seems less important than characters. I don't know what I'm talking about. Cover art, logo. I could even do those maybe during the test reading as well as anything else. And I'm going to archive this column so I don't accidentally put anything else in the basket. But I have like a schedule. And obviously I can look at this, I could flex it, I can move things around. But this is where on each date, I've made up my mind for these are the things I'm giving myself permission to look at. And like I said earlier, it's not to overwhelm myself with there's so many weeks and there's so many different things to do. It's the opposite. Is to say there's 3 things I'm worrying about this week. And any other stuff, not the right time. That's August 9th's problem. That's August 16th's problem. That's August 23rd's problem. I'll worry about that then. And if I have another idea and it might be like, oh, there's a whole thing I forgot to think about where I need to, I don't know, maybe I've got a friend who has color blindness. They can't distinguish certain colors. They had a bad experience with a certain comic. I want to run it by them for the feedback at a certain stage in this process. I give her, that's an important thing to do. This is not the time to do it. I haven't even decided on this yet. Maybe I'll put it here, run it by my friend Joe to make sure the colors don't seem inaccessible to him before it's too late and I'm more committed across other things. And maybe this is this week, maybe it's that week. But again, it's when I can spot a task, I can throw it ahead. And then we start using the schedule. So let's say it's August 1st, August 2nd. I'm taking stock of where I'm at. This is the other kind of important part of this process. I'm burning the calendar behind me. So I can't wait for the deadline. It's done. I archive this. Archives the Trello word for delete. So probably because you can also restore stuff under your activity if you want to go back here and take something you deleted accidentally. It's been archived. It's not actually permanently deleted. All right, so I picked a style, a character design. Did someone say something?
Scratch, because this wasn't a question I was able to easily just clip out entirely without some explanation. So at this point, the instructor pointed out, as you know, I'm not from the comic side thing, I'm in the game development side. There's a whole bunch of implementation, actual construction stuff we didn't get into yet. And the things that we laid out from the initial student ideas are kind of conceptual. They're making decisions. There's other kind of layers that are separate from drawing and inking and writing and these different just kind of concrete tasks. And so what we go through here next is adding those in. And we just kind of decided as sort of a high-level chat, let's stick them onto the end of this schedule, even though for the classroom they need to cram it in all before the end of this month. But just for sake of illustration here, we want to add those tasks, but we're just kind of assuming that they're going to follow this first layer of tasks. So we kind of continue this as an exercise, picking a future date, in which we're still going to be then accounting for drawing, inking, coloring, these other things that happen in the creation of the comic itself, separate from the sort of more planning, decision, experimenting type phases that happened earlier on that we laid out so far in the schedule. Back to the video.
So let's kind of stick to the scope of what we're trying to do with that, and then we're going to kind of do after it. So let's say, how long do you suggest they might spend for doing what this is? In which case, I'm just going to arbitrarily, I feel like by Oct 18, and again, maybe this isn't quite realistic, but, you know, it's a Disneyland scale buildings, just for sake of illustration here. So I'm going to put this even after that. So, okay, now we are entering, let's see, class hand-in. And this is also where a nice thing we can use these columns for, by the way, is also note like start of making comic phase. We can mark those. The other thing that's handy for these two is I have something going up. So I happen to have, and this is actually true, high school 20-year reunion this week. If I know that there's some stuff in my life, my birthday, a family trip, people in town, whatever, I can mark it in the column so I don't lose track of like when I'm shuffling cards around between weeks. Oh, let's you know, not make that week too heavy. That's literally the holiday or something for me. But say, let's look over here. But actually, first I want to show just a couple more weeks on kind of shredding the bridge behind us. Then we'll pick that up in a second. Because let's say we're not even sure yet. Let's say this. Let's say I have until the 30th. Decide whether to actually make the comic. And this is a thing, right, where I think sometimes people, at least in the game development space, they think of this very linear pattern of like, okay, first I prototype something, then I build something, then I spend years doing it. And most prototypes shouldn't get built fully out. And if they are, you didn't really prototype. You were just building a thing. You just committed already. Part of what we're doing, right, is making an informed decision of, do I feel like this has legs? Am I enjoying it? Does this make sense? Are people receptive to it? To actually size that, do I want to spend more time to it? So let's say we have a build in our schedule. So I'm going to get there by shredding to it. Then when we get there, then we're going to fill out our schedule. If the answer to that was yes, the answer is going to be yes, because that's kind of part we're doing. But we get time, right? So let's say I didn't get to character designs. I did pick my genre, so I'm proud of myself picking the genre. Character designs get scooted forward. I archive my week behind me. And part of why I archive the weeks behind me, some people like to leave, some people will want to leave empty columns or something. My problem is it's irrelevant how much time passed. All that's ever relevant is now, in the time I have left until my deadline. That's the accordion of time I am squishing. And so if I'm pushing things ahead, is this going to displace some other brick? The other thing what you saw happen there was I moved something ahead by one. And a thing that happens all the time in our game development groups, and I could only imagine happens for any other kind of creative thing, is they'll start what I call snow plowing, which is like, well, I didn't get to some of these, and they'll all just shove it ahead 1 week. And immediately you're like, okay, well, first of all, I clearly last week didn't get done 3 of these. I'm now assuming next week, in addition to what I already had planned, I'm going to do twice as much of things I didn't do last week is just not the reality of time. And so when we're scooting cards forward that aren't happening, it helps for us to distribute them, to not just shove them all to the very next column, but to be like, okay, well, out of these, this one could wait more than that one. This one needs to wait after that one. This one could afford to be. And now I've kind of at least kept my layer a little thinner, a little more manageable. And it's about not splitting our attention too many different directions of what I'm trying to do this week, with still some trust in like, well, this is tougher. This was not the plan. I don't like this as much, but this is still possible. Okay, I write a script. I do storyboard. I do that. Maybe I didn't do that yet. Schedule, archive. And again, trying to catch myself. Okay, I start to snowplow. I'm going to push some things ahead. I can actually push logo and cover art until after my friend's reading it. And again, so 1 week at a time, cutting through this, because now we got up to, are we at the, yeah, decided to make an actual comic. We say yes. As part of the week, while we hand it off to our test reader, we made a Google form for their feedback. I'm going to come over here and fill out my schedule now for trying to make the comic. And so let me first make an unsorted column again, because that's always we don't want to try to think about it in the right order. First one is dump task. What are some things people have to do to make a comic in no particular order in the physical sense? You said inking, drafting, lettering, a coloring, question mark? Are we also looking like printing, stapling, binding, that kind of stuff? Preparing a nice PDF for online distribution. And that might also then include figuring out, is there like a universal answer for like, where's the like at home for home team for game developers, it's like itch.io. Is there like this is the website people put their PDFs on, or is like part of the question figure out which sites to distribute it on? Got it. Upload that PDF to, and again, I might even throw in there, decide where or how to do any promotional posts. And this doesn't necessarily mean, running ads. It could very much be, I want to post it on LinkedIn. I want to post it on Facebook. I want to tell my friends and family. I want to put it out there in some other way. Okay, so we've got some phases. Out of these, any particular order, I assume, let's see, drafting probably comes early-ish. Lettering before inking, coloring after inking. Decide where to upload the PDF to. Prepare a nice PDF. Decide whether to promote. Maybe want to kind of like lettering feels like a week when I could get. And so one thing to realize too, it's not just distributing work. I like to find it helpful to scratch different parts of my brain. This is one of the privileges I certainly have in game development that you have as well in comics. There's part of your brain that wants to write, part of it wants to draw, part of it wants to do other things. And so where I can balance a week of not all just 3D modeling, not all just programming, not all just level design, but a mix of both, I find it exhausts me not as severely as if I am deep pigeonhole factory worker specialized in like, all I get to think about this week is sound effects. I can't handle it. If I can balance that with a little bit of something else, all right, now I'm having a better life. And so that for me is sort of a stamina consideration. The other version that also has is that if I'm very proficient in one, if I'm very good as an artist, but less good as a writer, it can help me to have a little bit of art as a treat the week I'm trying to do the writing stuff. So I don't feel like I'm beating myself up over like, I'm so bad at this, but I'm like, but I'm good at some things. And it's just sort of part of our human morale factor we're thinking about as part of the production lens. It's not all just spreadsheets and stats or schedules. All right, but anyway, so like here's a schedule. Just from your started making comic. Oh man, I didn't even use a week. I'm gonna fill that out. Now I might even also build in here, ask Tessa for feedback on my schedule. because like you have resources that people can connect with and people can ask, and again, like it very much is a real thing to run it by someone else who knows better, who you have some reason. I don't mean to volunteer you to like look at their thing outside of a class, but if you know someone, ask someone, Tessa, or someone else in your network who you can get an answer from, to just second guess, like, does this seem plausible? Am I being unrealistic about this? Am I beating stuff over? Like, there's no way that should happen in 3 weeks. Don't be ridiculous. Or like, yeah, that seems manageable. You know, often the people I'm working with, they've got a few hours a week here and there. They're trying to fit in around their classes, their day job, their other stuff. And so just kind of getting someone else's sense for like, yeah, this isn't wild. This is plausible for what you're trying to do here. All right, does this seem doable? Question mark. We could come back and start to smush some of those over. But part of what that's so great about is it helps us make these hard trade-offs about, I think, of a lot of the scheduling. It's not just like, oh, you decided what to do. Now I'm going to make a schedule of it. Deciding what to do is partly decided through the exercise and making a schedule of it. And I think of it like when you're ordering from ordering from a catalog, because I'm a dinosaur. When you're like ordering off a menu at a restaurant or Amazon or something, you're looking at prices, and that's a factor you consider. Not only do I want this, but like, do I want this for $100? Do I want this for $10? And when you're scheduling stuff, you're like, okay. And all the time in game development, I've working with these leads, I'm building a schedule. There's 180 games this way in our group, and they'll be like, oh, I really want to add like a, wouldn't it be great if I had like a jet airplane to this tank game? So I'm like, all right, well, let's look at it. We're gonna need to add the model. We got some sounds for it. You got some texture for it. You got to have this, that, and the other functionality and the different AI for it and so on. And they can look at that schedule and be like, but I don't want it that bad. And so I don't want a plane after all, because the time cost or the trade-offs of what else is going to push off the table. And so if we start looking at, okay, well, we got to produce this, including the PDF, all by a certain date, we might start looking at, okay, well, then what other tasks are we compressing? Do we not have the luxury of as much time before we commit to our concept, before we try to, do we, have to figure out our color and our characters and our something else all in the same week? That might be true, but it meant that we could look at this and say, okay, well, then this didn't fit in our window. What has to give? But it lets us think about that separately from, okay, well, now I can take my manager hat off. I can look at just the column in front of me, and having figured out like, okay, this is the things I worry about this week. Other problems, not thinking about right now. And for part of this also becomes so important for me is that this is a thing where part of where I think our attentional spread, whether or not it's neurodivergence for some people, whether it's just the state of technology in the world around us, there's infinite resources we could learn from, tutorials to watch, YouTube videos, entertaining stuff, things that we could do, learn, etc. When you have a project you're applying it to, you have this filter for like, does this apply to the current step of the current thing that I'm doing? You can look at those things and figure out, does it apply to the thing that I'm doing? And if it doesn't, then now's not the time to do it, but it gives us a clear thing to dig for. Like I mentioned earlier there, so completeeveryproject.com, which I think is a pretty fair price. It's a newer course I just released, and it's a more digested, structured, heavily tested version of this. Recently passed 1,000 people who went through it. Granted, I did a big promo recently, so it helped that number, but you'll see some reviews on it, and it's about this scheduling. It includes that decision spreadsheet and kind of another kind of more specific example and talking about that. It includes showing details about doing the playtesting forum type stuff. And I included at the end of it is also 2 audiobooks. There's ebooks included if you'd rather read than hear me talk for 5 and 7 more hours respectively. But they are about other productivity questions I run into where I've got people who they have the time, they have the technology, they have the means, they aren't doing the thing they mean to do. And so the 2 different audiobooks in there, one is about staying on task, and there's a specific thing. And so we think about the way it relates to this kind of Trello board plan. Okay, I've got a Trello task. I know I need to do it. I've kicked this card ahead 3 different weeks. I'm not doing it. What the heck's going on? I need to get myself to do it. And it's a whole several hour audio. We've got processes, simple tips involves kind of like say writing on a whiteboard, and then some things about how we do that. That just help us follow through on like, okay, well, there's versions I can get by 7 p.m. today. And here's how I'm going to get myself to do that. That one's self-command. And then self-doubt in there is a sort of partner material that goes with it that I can pairs with this. So it's basically, I work with a lot of people who they've never tried modeling, making music, making programming, whatever, and leading a project. They're trying to get themselves, they basically won't assign themselves the task. They wouldn't even make themselves a Trello. They wouldn't even give themselves the thing, put it on the whiteboard, and untangling why and some of the hangups people have that stop them from trying something new, doing things they mean to be doing, whether putting it off, whether it's perfectionism, whether it's feeling hung up or fears about it, etc. It's various things I found help people untangle those knots so they can kind of open up more doors for themselves towards making use of the many great resources around us, the things on the internet, other tutorials, other things, other opportunities around us, growing into new communities and ways to do stuff in the world. So those, but all that's literally included in that same video course. Both those audiobooks are at the end of it as both audiobooks and ebooks, like a nice PDF or something like that in the end. If anyone's curious in the game programming stuff, codeyourfirstgame.com. That is my bigger video course. That's 360, almost 370,000 people taking that one. That's like coding Pong and breakout looking stuff, not those specific games because those are Atari trademarks. But games like that in JavaScript in a few hours. The first course builds up to a second course. That the first course there is free. That's part of what has such a high number. There's a paid course that follows it. That's also, I think, reasonably affordable depending on when Udemy's doing their promos. But you know, these are things I self-published, put together, made a textbook around that's included with the second course. And so if you're interested in the programming side of stuff, a lot of what I do is help people who their core strength is programming, and on top of that, they're building game design, 3D modeling, project planning kind of pieces to expand the kind of stuff they can do. But yeah, I think that's probably the high level. That and sorry, one other thing in there. I almost forgot the main thing that I do. Home team game dev.com. And that is that we've got people in 19 time zones, about 100-ish plus or minus, building games together, anywhere from 5 to 15 in parallel at once, 2 to 6 month schedules. That's how we made 180 games in the past 7 or 8 years. Got podcasts, ebooks, audiobooks, YouTubes, and stuff attached to that. But that's my main training group. But that's, again, very specifically game development team stuff. And that's my main service as a teacher, as opposed to my materials and products, video, ebooks, audiobooks, and stuff. Yeah, very well. And it's only like 4 hours long. It's very much a I know busy people don't have time for like a 40-hour, 400-hour thing. It's you could fit this in a weekend and be like, all right, I'm now equipped for the rest of my life to do my projects a little better. Done. All right. Thanks for y'all's patience and participation and being here.